We all tend to think entrepreneurship is this amazing level playing field, don't we?
Yeah, definitely.
Where the best ideas, the hardest workers, they just naturally rise to the top.
That's the common story for sure.
Well, this deep dive, we're taking a closer look, especially when it comes to women entrepreneurs. And we're
Mhm.
asking, what if that very belief, that idea of a level field, is actually part of the problem?
Exactly. We're digging into a really fascinating study. It's from the Journal of Management Studies.
Okay.
And it's based on these really in-depth conversations, like biographical interviews with 49 women entrepreneurs in London.
Wow, 49. That's quite a few.
It is. And it explores how this widely held idea of gender equality in entrepreneurship, how it actually persists, often in ways we don't really notice.
Okay, so the study uses this specific term, illusio. Sounds a bit academic,
A
maybe.
little, yeah, but a concept is pretty straightforward.
How would you explain it?
Think of it like this. It's the shared belief, the collective buy-in, that the game, in this case, entrepreneurship, and all the stuff that comes with it,
Mhm.
the challenges, the potential rewards,
Right.
that it's all valuable, it's worthwhile, and crucially, that it's sort of fair. It's this basic agreement that often just goes completely unchallenged.
Gotcha. So it's like the fundamental assumption you make when you step into that world.
Right. It's almost like the price of admission. This unspoken understanding that it's a space where, theoretically, everyone has an equal shot.
So our mission today, then, is to use this research to unpack that, to understand the subtle ways this belief sticks around, even when maybe the reality on the ground is a bit different.
That's the goal. We want to go beyond just the surface level stories, the headlines about successful women founders, and really get into the mechanics of what's happening underneath.
Yeah.
How is this idea sustained?
Okay. So the study kicks off by looking at this really common narrative we hear all the time, that entrepreneurship is this fantastic path to, like, freedom and equality for women. You see it everywhere, right? Media, government
Oh,
initiatives.
absolutely. The idea that starting your own business gives women that elusive work-life balance.
Yeah, and lets them, take control, reach their potential.
And what's really interesting is how the study connects this to something called post-feminism.
Okay, post-feminism, what does that mean in this context? It's not saying feminism is over, is it?
No, no, not at all. It's more about a shift in attitude, maybe. An emphasis on individual choice, individual empowerment, feeling strong as a woman.
Right.
But the potential downside, the study suggests, is that this focus on individual power can sometimes lead us to downplay or even ignore the bigger picture. The historical context, the ongoing structural inequalities that still exist.
Ah, okay. So it's like the focus shifts solely to the individual, can I make it, rather than questioning the system itself, like the lean-in idea, perhaps.
That's a good example they mentioned, yeah. The message often becomes, if you're not succeeding, maybe you just need to try harder, lean in more.
Even if the playing field isn't actually level.
Exactly. And the study points out, look, there's plenty of evidence showing the entrepreneurial world isn't perfectly gender equal, yet this image, this discourse of equality, keeps getting pushed.
And that leads them to their big research question then.
Precisely. Which is, how does this idea, this discourse of gender equality, actually stay so dominant? Why do we keep believing it, despite contradictory evidence?
That's the core puzzle they're tackling. It's not just saying inequality exists, but why does the belief in equality persist?
Yes, because a lot of research has pointed out the discrepancies, but this study really wants to understand the mechanisms sustaining the belief. They argue that to really get it, we need to look at power in different forms, not just the stories we tell, but also the concrete resources people have.
Okay, and this is where the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu comes into the picture, right? We mentioned illusio, but he brings more tools to the table.
He does. His framework is really central to their analysis. So, besides illusio, he talks about the field, like the specific world of entrepreneurship.
Right.
And within any field, there's usually a dominant way of doing things, an orthodoxy. Think of it as the unwritten rules, the established order.
And in entrepreneurship, that orthodoxy often reflects.
Well, the study argues it often reflects these quite masculinized, highly individualized ways of operating. Long hours, certain networking styles, a particular definition of success.
Okay. And to navigate this field, people use different kinds of capital. You mentioned resources. Can you break down what Bourdieu means by capital? It's not just cash, is it?
No, definitely not just cash. That's economic capital, of course, money, assets, savings. Crucial, but not the whole story.
What else is there?
There's social capital. That's your network, who you know, the connections you can leverage. Then cultural capital. This is things like your education, your knowledge, specific skills, even the way you talk and present yourself, things valued within that particular field.
Okay, education, skills, presentation. And there's one more, right? Symbolic.
Yes, symbolic capital.
Yeah.
This one's a bit more abstract. It's about prestige, reputation, credibility, recognition. Think of it like having status or legitimacy within the entrepreneurial world. It's not money itself, but it can certainly help you get money or opportunity.
Yeah, that reputation that opens doors.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see how having different amounts of these various capitals could really make a difference.
Absolutely.
So what's the study's central argument connecting these capitals back to the illusio of gender equality? How does it all fit together?
Okay, so the core argument is this. The belief in gender equality, the illusio, is actively sustained, often unintentionally, through the ways women entrepreneurs use the capital they do have to navigate and compensate for the gender inequalities they face.
Okay, say more about that. They're using their strengths to manage the disadvantages.
Exactly. They're essentially making trade-offs. They deploy their specific mix of economic, social, or cultural capital to overcome gendered obstacles or fit into the existing, often male-defined, norms.
And in doing so, they might inadvertently make it look like the system is working fairly, even though they had to use extra resources just to keep up.
That's the crux of it. By successfully navigating the field using these capitals, they might reinforce the perception that the field itself is inherently fair or gender neutral, masking the underlying issues.
Wow, okay. That's a really subtle but powerful idea. Let's get into some concrete examples from the study. They talk about the illusio of work-life balance.
Yes.
We hear this constantly, right? Entrepreneurship is sold as the solution for women wanting flexibility, wanting to combine career and family. What did the interviews reveal?
Well, the research suggests that for some women, achieving this sense of balance isn't inherent to entrepreneurship itself, but is actually enabled by their economic capital. They use their money what the study calls buying power.
Buying power, so literally paying for help.
Exactly. Using economic capital to purchase services that free up their time and energy, primarily things like childcare, domestic help.
Can you give an example?
Sure. One woman, respondent 9, was quite clear. She said she preferred having a nanny, feeling it was better for her kids than if she were a full-time mom, which allowed her to focus on her business.
Okay, so she used her financial resources to create a situation where she could dedicate herself to the business, seemingly achieving that balance.
Right. But it relies on having the money to afford that nanny in the first place. And it also perhaps reinforces the underlying societal expectation around childcare.
Makes sense. Any other examples of this buying power?
Yeah, another respondent, number 47, talked about hiring an assistant who was also a qualified nanny. So again, using money to solve both work admin and childcare needs simultaneously.
A multitasking hire funded by the business or personal wealth.
Precisely. And another, respondent 34, who was quite established, mentioned having consistent live-in childcare right from when her children were born. Again, a solution made possible by significant economic resources.
The study also mentioned buying flexibility. How is that different from buying power?
It's related, also uses economic capital, but it's more about buying time and space for the business itself, especially early on.
Ah, okay. How so?
It means using savings or other financial cushions so you don't face immediate pressure to generate high revenues. You can afford to spend time networking, developing the idea, maybe making mistakes, without the business needing to be instantly profitable.
Like startup runway funded personally.
Exactly. Respondent 31, for instance, talked about using her savings in the initial stages, specifically to give her the breathing room to network and really refine her business concept before needing it to pay the bills.
So both buying power and buying flexibility involve using economic capital to essentially fit into the existing demanding entrepreneurial mold, the expectation of long hours, constant availability, extensive networking.
That's what the study suggests. By using their financial resources, these women can successfully operate within those norms.
And the side effect is?
The side effect might be that it reinforces the illusion that work-life balance or flexibility is readily achievable for all women entrepreneurs, obscuring the fact that the means to achieve it, significant economic capital, aren't available to everyone.
Right. Okay, that clarifies the work-life balance aspect. The study then shifts to the illusio of meritocracy.
Yes, another powerful belief.
This deeply ingrained idea that entrepreneurship is purely about talent, effort, the best person wins. Sounds good, but again, the study finds nuances.
It does. They identify specific trade-offs women make around this idea, too. Two key ones they label are having talent and working hard and being lucky.
Okay, let's take having talent first. What does that trade-off look like?
This involves framing your success primarily or even solely as a result of your own innate abilities, your natural gifts.
And downplaying other factors.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Downplaying the role that maybe your existing capital, social connections, cultural background, economic resources might have played. Or, alternatively, downplaying the gendered barriers you might have actually overcome.
Can you give an example from the women they spoke to?
Sure. There was respondent 46. She was in a very male-dominated industry and felt she had to be objectively better than the men to get ahead.
Okay.
But she attributed her ability to build crucial connections mainly to her personality, rather than, say, acknowledging years of strategic networking or perhaps leveraging existing social capital.
Interesting. So framing it as an inherent trait rather than a developed skill or resource.
Sort of, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, respondent 19 felt her success in making global connections was just down to her natural ability to think globally. Again, emphasizing innate talent over potentially explaining the resources or experiences that enabled that global thinking.
It's like they internalize the meritocracy narrative so much that they explain their own success purely through that lens. I made it because I'm talented.
That's one interpretation the study offers, yes.
Oh.
And focusing on inherent individual talent helps maintain that idea of a level playing field where everyone supposedly starts with the same potential.
Okay, what about the other trade-off? Working hard and being lucky.
This one is also very common in entrepreneurial narratives, isn't it?
Definitely. The hard graft, the lucky break.
Right. So this trade-off involves attributing success primarily to sheer effort and perhaps a dose of good fortune or chance.
And again, potentially obscuring other factors.
Exactly. Obscuring the impact of, say, pre-existing advantages, capital endowments, or systemic factors. It focuses on individual agency and randomness over structure.
How did this show up in the interviews?
Well, respondent 32 acknowledged being atypical as a woman in her sector, but she strongly emphasized her intense hard work as the reason for her success. She also expressed a belief that being a woman eventually disappears as a factor if you work hard enough and prove yourself to investors.
So minimizing the role of gender bias, perhaps.
Or at least framing hard work as the primary antidote to it. And another example, respondent 24, explicitly attributed her entrepreneurial success mainly to luck, despite having, as the researchers noted, a background with significant educational privilege.
So crediting chance rather than, say, the cultural or social capital that might have come with that education.
Potentially, yes. By highlighting hard work and luck, these narratives reinforce the impression that success is available to anyone willing to put in the effort or who happens to catch a lucky break.
And this makes the system seem more open and fair than it might actually be, hiding the ways structural advantages shape outcomes.
That's the argument. These narratives, focusing on talent, hard work, and luck, all contribute to sustaining this powerful illusio of entrepreneurship as a pure meritocracy. They make success seem entirely individual, obscuring the uneven distribution of resources and the persistent influence of gender.
But crucially, the study also found that this illusio, this belief system, doesn't hold true for all the women interviewed. Some experience a breaking with it.
Yes, that's a really important part of the findings.
What causes that break? When does the illusion shatter?
It often happens when women find they simply can't make those trade-offs we discussed. Maybe they lack the necessary economic capital, or their social networks don't provide the right kind of support.
Okay.
Or it happens when they face very direct, undeniable instances of gender bias or discrimination, even despite having significant capital. The reality clashes too harshly with the illusion.
Can you give an example of not being able to make the trade-off?
Respondent 28 is a key example here. She ultimately decided to sell her business because she found it impossible to reconcile the intense demands of running it with her domestic responsibilities. She couldn't buy her way out of that fundamental conflict with the available resources or support structures.
So the work-life balance promise just didn't hold up in her reality.
Exactly. The trade-off wasn't possible or wasn't enough. And then there are examples of facing bias despite having resources. Respondent 21, who had access to finance and networks, still encountered explicitly negative comments about combining motherhood with running a serious business. That kind of experience directly contradicts the idea that gender disappears if you're successful enough.
Yeah, that would definitely cause some dissonance.
And one more, respondent 1. She had a really strong corporate background before starting her tech company. Lots of experience, presumably high cultural capital in a general business sense.
Okay.
But she found that in the male-dominated tech investment world, her prior experience wasn't really valued or seen as relevant. She struggled to get funding. Her specific type of cultural capital didn't translate or wasn't recognized in that specific part of the field.
So these kinds of experiences, not being able to afford the trade-offs or facing direct bias or having your credentials dismissed, they create this disconnect, a clash between the official story and lived reality.
That's precisely it. This clash, this dissonance, can lead women to develop what the study calls heterodox reflexivity, basically, a more critical understanding of the game. They start questioning the rules, the assumptions, the fairness of the whole entrepreneurial field itself.
They see through the illusio, essentially.
Yes, they break with it.
So stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, what are the implications of all this? If this illusio is being sustained, often unintentionally, through these trade-offs, what are the broader consequences?
Well, the studies suggest that the very perpetuation of this illusion can end up being disadvantageous for women entrepreneurs as a whole.
How so? Even for the ones who can make the trade-off.
Yes, because even as some individuals successfully navigate the system using their capital, the fact that the illusion persists masks the underlying structural inequalities. It prevents a collective recognition of the problems and therefore collective action to address them. It keeps the system itself from being fundamentally challenged.
But there's a potential upside, right? You mentioned the women who break with the illusio, who develop that critical perspective.
Exactly. They are the ones who have the potential to become agents of change. Because they see the system's flaws, they're positioned to potentially challenge the status quo, to advocate for different rules, a different game.
Though the study mentioned some potential pitfalls there too, like falling into just talking about it or ineffective activism.
Right. They briefly mentioned Freire's concepts of the traps of mere verbalism or unstrategic activism. Change requires more than just awareness. It requires tackling the systems that enable these trade-offs in the first place.
So things like access to finance, childcare support, challenging biases in investment, rethinking what merit even looks like in entrepreneurship.
Precisely. The study points towards needing changes in entrepreneurial finance, support services, education, broader labor market policies, how we handle care responsibilities as a society, and fundamentally redefining meritocracy. Systemic issues require systemic solutions.
Okay, so to sort of wrap things up then, what are the key takeaways we want listeners to hold on to from this deep dive?
I think the main point is that this common idea, this narrative of gender equality in entrepreneurship, well, it's complicated. It can function as an illusio.
Right, a belief that's kept alive, partly by the way women entrepreneurs use their different resources, money, connections, skills, to navigate the very real inequalities they face.
Exactly. And these individual strategies, these trade-offs, while potentially helpful for some, can inadvertently mask the deeper systemic issues and make the playing field seem level when it perhaps isn't for everyone.
And while some women can successfully play this game using their capital, others hit barriers. They experience that dissonance, that clash with reality, which makes them question the whole setup.
And that questioning, that breaking with the illusio, is where the potential for critical understanding and ultimately maybe real change lies.
It definitely leaves you with something to think about. Does our own individual drive to succeed, within the existing rules, does that sometimes unintentionally prop up systems that aren't fair to everyone?
That's the provocative question, isn't it? What alternative ways could we imagine to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem that's genuinely inclusive from the ground up?
Yeah. It encourages you to look beyond the headlines, beyond the simple success stories, and consider those hidden costs, those unseen trade-offs that might be embedded in the narratives of equality we encounter every day. What's really going on beneath the surface?